Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Double Waved Yellows podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the Turkish Grand Prix from Istanbul. Hodders and Tyson join me as always. Evening, chaps. How are we doing?
Okay, doing good.
Excellent
Not
stuff.
bad, not
Excellent
bad.
stuff. It's going to be a shorter than usual podcast because, well, Tyson, you haven't got much to talk about in terms of sport race, have you?
No, the next race is in 7 weeks, so I have nothing to say.
Well, you may have something to say a bit later on, but anyway. And Hodders, no W Series today either.
Well, not yet, anyway.
No, we've got the grand finale, the double header, coming up at the next event. But more on that later on. Let's dive straight into the Formula One event. So the Formula One Turkish Grand Prix, and Bottas wins for the first time this season and the first time in well over a year. The Red Bulls finishing second and third, Verstappen leading home his teammate Sergio Perez. Lewis Hamilton finishes fifth after starting 11th with a grid penalty, although it will be a case of what could have been as he had to pit late on for a second set of intermediate tyres. So we're going to get straight into the drivers that we were keeping an eye on. And Tyson, I'm going to go to you first. You were keeping an eye on the honey badger himself, Mr. Daniel Ricciardo.
Yeah, this makes a change. I get to start. So, Ricardo, he had a really tough weekend. He set a good time in qualifying, but the track just evolved. Everyone else was faster. He qualified 16th, ended up taking a few engine penalties, start from the back of the grid, and then in the race itself got stuck behind George Russell for quite a while. He was first to pit for the new Inters, which earned him a few places back as he got into his groove, but only managed to finish the race in 13th. And yeah, he'll probably be hoping for much better next time out.
Mm-hmm, indeed so. And Hodders, the way qualifying was and the track was evolving throughout, it really was a case for each session, get across the line as late as he can, really. Unfortunately, Ricardo, I think he just left it too late, wasn't able to get the time in.
Yeah, it was unfortunate. I suppose that's always the case when you've got a track that is always going to evolve, having rained and then started to dry up as well. It is one of the cases of trying to leave it as late as you can. But again, it's always a case of get out earlier than you think you need to, otherwise you will get caught out and be too much too late. Or you might end up with a red flag. Not that one happened.
Indeed. So, and Tyson will talk more about this as the podcast unfolds, but the track conditions for the actual race was really, really odd. It rained fairly heavily in the morning, and then it just stopped. But the track just didn't appear to dry out as we normally would. It was very, very cold there throughout.
Yeah, it was an interesting one. I was expecting it to start damp and then maybe slick conditions near the end, but as we saw, someone tried it, it didn't work, and yeah, it just was just the way to go for the whole race.
Absolutely. Hodders, we're going to move on to your driver choice, and first and foremost, it was Checo, Sergio Perez, who you had an eye on, and he had a nice, solid weekend.
He definitely did perform well in practice. When it came to qualification itself, he qualified 7th on the grid, but due to the grid penalties elsewhere from other drivers, he was 6th, therefore finishing out the 3rd row on the left-hand side. He had a very good, solid race. He had some great racing with Lewis Hamilton in the middle stage of the race, and in the end, it all paid off handsomely with a podium in 3rd place.
Absolutely. And Tyson, a much needed haul of points to support Red Bull in their battle against Mercedes.
Yeah, Perez had a really good weekend, and this is where it's going to be crucial in the Constructors' Championship. They need the second drivers putting in the performances like we saw this weekend.
And Hodders, we saw a sort of one-off livery by Red Bull to give thanks to their engine partners Honda for all the support that they've given over the last few years. It was such a beautiful livery to look at.
Oh, it really is. I mean, we don't see predominantly white liveries very often. It's rather a pity because it was clean, it was fresh, and it really looked good on the eye.
And for those of you who haven't seen the liveries, there's loads of pictures out there. Or you can also go and download the new update for the F1 2021 game, because that's in there as well. next up, my driver who I was randomly assigned to keep an eye on. I am getting lucky with these picks because I got Valtteri Bottas.
Hey.
Yeah, superb weekend for the Finner. Likes the flag when starting from pole position. His first win in over, I think, the 10th of his career. Hodders, this was the Bottas of old.
It really was. It is the Valtteri Bottas we're accustomed to. Getting the occasional win here and there, I mean, being second fiddle at Mercedes, but this is the Bottas we wanted to see, we were hoping he would see. I think it might be one of those situations of, yes, he's moving team next year, but it's better to go out on a high.
Absolutely agree. Yes, or best to finish your Mercedes career on a high. Tyson, is this a possibility that this may be the last chance that Bottas will ever have to stand on the top step of the podium?
It's very possible because he is moving to Alpha next year. Let's be honest, it's not as good as the Mercedes, but you never know. We have seen strange things happen.
Well, I tell you what, if Bottas wins in 2022, that will be spectacular. But we will see. Tyson, your next driver, you were keeping an eye on the Williams driver, Latifi.
Yeah, and really quiet weekend for Latifi. I don't really have a lot to say. He qualified 17th. He finished in the same position, 17th. He just had the spin on lap one and really did what he could from there.
Yeah, and Hodders, it was bizarre considering the weather. It wasn't really over eventful, for want of a better term. Latifi just did what he could in the conditions with the car.
Yeah, I think it was a sort of a theme for Williams throughout the weekend, is that while Williams do have pace, and I think I said before that we think possibly that occasionally Williams have outperformed themselves this season. That's not a detriment to either Latifi or to Russell. I mean, Russell's raced brilliantly this season, but I think it was just one of those cases where the car just wasn't quite adapting to the track, and Williams just ended up with a rather quiet weekend, true to sort of the form we would have expected.
Indeed so. But someone who did have an interesting race in the wet was your driver, Esteban Ocon. Hodders, tell us about it.
Yeah, he did. He qualified in 12th, so middle of the pack and not unreasonable for Alpine. Yeah, quite notable that he finished in the points in P10, having stayed out on the track the whole race. He didn't go in for tyres, he stayed out there, which goes to show that the Inters can last.
Indeed, the Pirelli Intermediate seemed to be very, very durable. And
say nice thing about Pirelli for a change. It's nice to say something nice about them this time.
Indeed, that's a very good point. And for those obviously not fully aware, when we have obviously wet conditions in F1, you don't have to use two different types of compounds. Not that anybody would have dared to try the slicks bar one lap, which we'll get into later on. Yeah, Tyson, a very, very rare feat to see a driver go the whole race distance, and this was the full race distance, no aborted starts, no red flags on one set of tyres.
Yeah, there was a couple of drivers who looked like they were going to try it, but Ocon, he made it happen, and he ended up with a point for it. So yeah, congrats to him.
Indeed so. I think the social media were calling them either the slick inters or the interslick, something like that, because a lot of the intermediates we did see in the latter stages and certainly after the race were pretty bold. Hodders, we certainly wouldn't recommend our listeners to drive on those sorts of tyres when they're on road conditions.
I wouldn't recommend it under any conditions. For a start, in most countries, it's illegal and likely to get you pulled over. So do please check your tyre treads when you can, folks. Bit of a public information thing there.
But yeah, and it was interesting to actually see Hodders, those tyres, not just for Ocon but for the whole of the grid, they seem to actually really last for quite a bit. And when you had that bald sort of stripe on it.
Yeah. Cases rather be sort of balding on maybe half or even in the middle. It goes to show we normally expect Inters to not last as long. I mean, we've seen races where there's been Inters before and they've not lasted as long, but it goes to show that under the right conditions and with good tyre management, they can last a full 300-kilometre race.
Indeed so. So we'll talk more obviously about the conditions later on. But the second driver I was keeping an eye on was Lance Stroll, who again had a normal, quiet weekend. Yeah, he started in P8, finished in P9. Tyson, not really much more to say. It was a bit of a stroll for Lance, I guess.
Yeah, you can say that. I genuinely forgot he was there at times.
Mm-hmm.
But he finished in the points, so yeah, good stuff.
Yep, that's all you need. And Hodders, that's just what you need in these sorts of races. Just a couple of points just helps the championship standings for Aston Martin.
Yeah, absolutely. And Aston Martin have done very well this season. A couple of points on the board can't be knocked. And it also shows that Lance Stroll is putting in the consistent performances that we're expecting of him.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Tyson, coming back to you, one driver that looked so promising in qualifying, but alas, it was not to be for Schumacher.
Yeah, young Mick had a pretty eventful weekend. He had his best qualifying performance this season, qualified 14th, and this time didn't spin it, so he was able to take part in Q2. It was really unfortunate that he got hit by Alonso early in the race, though never recovered from it and ended up finishing 19th.
Yeah, it was just so unlucky. But Hodders, what was great to see in part for me afterwards, Alonso makes a beeline for Schumacher to apologise, and Alonso recognising also Schumacher's talent.
Absolutely. I think it's one thing that's very common amongst F1 drivers is that more often than not, for all the personalities and some would say egos, they are human and they do give credit to other where credit's due. And Fernando Alonso has been in this game for a number of years. He knows when he's wrong, he admits when he's wrong, and he'll try and make it where he can. I'm sure they probably, within reason, would have had a drink afterwards under normal circumstances, but you never know, there's always the future.
Indeed, so, and hopefully we will see more of these performances from young Schumacher for the remainder of the season and potentially next year. Hodders, you managed to get one of the double wave yellows favourites, Yuki Tsunoda. How did young Yuki do?
I couldn't believe my luck when I got him. It's been a while. I mean, I know we used to choose them sort of ourselves before, but it's nice to have him through random chance as well. The young Japanese rookie, he made his first Q3 since the Austrian GP, which is commendable. He had a very, very solid qualifying. He was solidly up there in the top 10 all the way through. He qualified in P9 and didn't get any upgrades due to grid penalty, but ninth is ninth. He finished in 14th. He had a rather unfortunate spin during the race, which probably harmed chances of getting points. But other than that, he had a very solid race and very commendable that he did hold off Lewis Hamilton for the best part of 7 or 8 laps, which is a good sign of things to come.
Yeah, definitely. I thought that was really actually great, strong defending by Tsunoda and Tyson. When we were watching this, we were thinking, how long is he going to hold him up? I think we thought probably 1 or 2 laps at best, but great driving from a ever developing and promising young talent.
Yeah, that was the main takeaway for me. The fight he had with Hamilton, he was defending really well, keeping him behind. Just unfortunate that he had that spin later in the race.
Mm-hmm. But I think in realistically looking at the pace and the time, I think it would have been a very difficult job for Tsunoda to get in the points. But he should be pleased with his performance nevertheless. And rounding it all off, my third pick, Antonio Giovinazzi. Again, a quiet race for Antonio, qualifying P16. And finishing in P11, just 0.7 of a second off the points finish. My, could he have that would have really helped him? Hodders had Gio got on the points.
Oh, it really would, particularly when it is worth noting at the moment that he does, at the time of recording this podcast, remain the only driver's seat yet to be confirmed.
Mm-hmm. And Tyson, do you think that performance that he had just fairly solid, just getting a decent finish, even though it was outside the points, that won't have hurt him too much?
No, it won't have hurt him at all. He's definitely putting in solid performances. I do feel it may be a little too late at this point, but yeah, he's doing well. He can certainly go out with a high if he's not re-signed for next year.
Yeah, definitely, Tyson. Because I think the consensus seems to be now that it's either going to be Antonio Giovinazzi or Guan Yu Zhou from Formula 2 who's going to get the final seat. Okay. So that's the 9 drivers that we had an eye on over the weekend. Time to have a look at who were our winners and spinners, who had a weekend to remember and who had a race they'd rather forget. We're going to do things a little bit differently. So to start with, we'll give our honourable mentions first. And we did mention it just a short while ago. Esteban Ocon, the first driver since Mika Salo in the Tyrrell, Monaco 1997, to go a full race distance without stopping. Just absolutely bizarre. And it's worth remembering, obviously, back on that Monaco race, they had that little thing called refueling. But just absolutely crazy. But alas, another honourable mention, George Russell, a spinner. Hodders, he was on for a great lap in qualifying too. He was almost certainly going to get himself into the top 10 shootout. Final corner, blew it.
He really did, and it wasn't fun to see. I think we're all groaning and surprised that it happened. Under those conditions, it can happen, but it is a real pity because I think he would have been probably gunning for Q3 and probably having a go at points as well again.
Mm-hmm. But Tyson, it was weird because Russell, we've seen this year when we've had wet conditions, he's usually a reliable driver in those.
Yeah, it was a surprise to say the least, but these things happen sometimes.
Mm-hmm, indeed so. Right, so on to our nominated winners and spinners, and I'm going to go first. So for me, my winner of the weekend was Sergio Perez. That absolutely epic side-by-side battle with Hamilton. I think it lasted a good 6 corners from sort of turn 10, through the fast right-hand sweeper, through the tight left, right, left, towards the end of the lap. They were side by side down the straight, all through one. It was just epic, real wheel to wheel racing, and both gave each other just the right amount of room. Tyson, it was brilliant.
Oh yeah, it was a really great fight between the two of them, and as I said earlier, this is what Red Bull needs from the second driver.
Mm-hmm, absolutely, and Hodders, we were just almost waiting for the contact. It nearly did happen in the pit entry, but it was just spellbinding to watch.
Absolutely, it very nearly did happen towards the pit lane, but again, it was noted that the line was crossed, but the stewards noted it alone. So fair play to the stewards for taking things into individual circles and the mitigation into account. But again, it didn't happen. Fortunately, we've had enough contact and such in races enough that we don't want any more.
Yeah, more penalties than a World Cup final, but that's another thing altogether. Hodders, I'm going to come to you next for your winners and spinners of the weekend.
Well, my winner, no surprise really, but very much earned rather than pure fandom, has to be Yuki Tsunoda. He had a solid. He got into Q3 for the first time since Austria's mentioned when I was discussing him before, which is very commendable. He did have an unfortunate spin, which might have cost him a shot at points, but again, it was just purely the track conditions, and these things happen in wet races. But that defence against Hamilton was some great racing craft, and I think we'll see more of that in the future, and I hope we do.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Tyson, I think it's fair to say that Tsunoda, for his first season of Formula One, he started really well out in Bahrain regardless, but he's very quickly grown and matured, and we're seeing an exciting racer develop.
Yeah, he's definitely developing nicely. I think he needs to work on his consistency at the moment. He's had a few really good showings, but then he's had a few really bad showings. But yeah, there is definitely potential there, and I think next year he's got that experience under his belt. We'll see some good results come from him.
Mm-hmm. But someone who could definitely do with some good results this season, Hodders, your spinner.
Yes, quite. Unfortunately, it's somebody we've not had to put much critique on for a while, but unfortunately, he's gone back to old habits. It is the RAF driver, I should say, Nikita Mazepin. I mean, the Russian Horse People Federation, not the Air Force. Unfortunately, he was back to old habits, ignoring blue flags, in fact, brazenly ignoring blue flags, while being told to let Hamilton pass, and very nearly collided with him. It was sort of the early season jitters are making a return in the latter part, and we don't want that.
And Tyson, that in that corner, it was the fast right-hander coming towards the end of that. If Mazepin and Hamilton had collided, the ramifications for that race, for Mazepin's F1 future and for the championship, would have been quite substantial.
Yeah, it was just a really careless move on Mazepin's part. There was just no need for it, really.
And given we saw Mazepin get a time penalty early in the season for quite brazenly blocking Perez when he was being blue flagged, I'm quite surprised actually that he didn't get one this time round for blocking Hamilton. But alas, I'm sure the stewards would have looked at that. Finally, Tyson, who were the two drivers that you felt were winners and spinners?
Right, so my winner is Carlos Sainz. He and Ricardo started at the back of the grid, and I just felt Sainz did a much better job. He made his way up through the field early. He got away with the overtake on Vettel after getting a little wiggle on. He did have the bad pit stop, which could have cost him a little bit, but yeah, taking it from the back up to P8, good result for him. But then my spinner, there was only one choice for me, Sebastian Vettel. He tried to gamble for the medium tyres and just got it completely wrong. As we saw, he made the call on the radio and said yes when Aston Martin asked him if they were ready for slick tyres, and yeah, the conditions just weren't there. He almost binned it even coming back into the pits to put the inters back on.
Yeah, not good. And Hodders, that radio call from Vettel was very odd because no one else was even talking about it on the pit radio. But I guess also, imagine if Vettel had come out and started putting in, green and purple sector times, everyone would have been piling into the pits for it. It was similar to Lando. It was a brave call, but alas, the wrong one.
I think it was very much credit for him for trying, but at least he realised quite early on that it wasn't going to work. I mean, it was a questionable call. It didn't look like the track was anywhere near switching to slicks. I mean, there was some who were wondering about it, but the way the track had been going for most of the race, it was pretty inherently clear that there wasn't going to be any chance of going for slicks, but credit for trying.
Yeah, he gave it a go. But fair play. It was worth a gamble, I think. I don't think Vettel had much to lose where he was. I don't think he was in the points when he made the call. But there we go. So moving on to talking points, we've actually got quite a few coming out of Istanbul. The first one, which was rather an interesting debate on the social media, and that was who's on pole, because Lewis Hamilton set the fastest lap in qualifying 3, but due to his 10-place grid penalty, he was demoted to 11th, and therefore the driver starting at the front of the field was Valtteri Bottas. Hodders, I come to you first. Basically, what are your thoughts on this? Who should be officially recorded as the pole sitter?
It's a tricky one, really. I mean, it's one of those where when penalties come in, it really does make it difficult. I mean, strictly speaking, you would think that pole position would be the fastest driver, dependent on, though, again, when you take penalties into account, you would think it would also be the fastest taking into account penalties. So it's either, personally, I think it's whoever's first on the grid after penalties are taken into account.
And I mean, Tyson, we had there was this similar debate in Monaco 2012 when Schumacher claimed what would have been his 92nd pole position? No, it would have been on pole position for the 2012 Monaco Grand Prix, but unfortunately he had a grid penalty and was demoted back. So I think that one was never officially claimed on the records, but. It is a tricky one, Tyson, because it does confuse the casual fans.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. I suppose when you think about it, pole position is the person who's going to start right at the front on the Sunday. But then, do you give the accolade to the person who set the fastest time on the Saturday?
Very, very tricky one. And it comes on also to sort of the discussion of, for a technical offence, should there be technical penalty? So my personal view, and it's going to probably create a fair bit of debate, instead of these grid penalties for engine or gearbox changes, how about you have ballast penalties? So if a driver does start at the front but they've changed their engine, they still start pole position, but they have an extra bit of weight to carry around for the race. Hodders, we've had really bizarre scenarios before. I think back to Lewis Hamilton at Belgian Grand Prix. He had something like a 60-place grid penalty for all manner of engine component changes, but of course he was only ever going to start 20th. It just seems bizarre.
It does seem bizarre that you get such a huge grid penalty and it not carry over to future races. If you're going to do such a penalty, you would think it would carry over as a result. But if not, then what's the point of having such a massive grid penalty as a result? A technical penalty should be for a technical offence like ballast. Does make sense though when the grid penalties, in essence, in a lot of cases, don't make a lot of sense because they don't change the result massively.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have tried to do that in terms of carry grid penalties over, but obviously, if you've got teams that were regularly changing engines or gearbox components, it made absolutely little difference, and also I think they tried to do it where if you had more than X number of places, you had to serve a time penalty during the race, which was just made even less sense. Tyson, what's your thoughts on this?
To be honest, I'm not sure about adding extra weight to the cars because we've seen this multiple times. The cars are so sensitive, they lose tiny little pieces, and it has such a dramatic effect on the overall performance of the car. So I think it would be a much heavier disadvantage than you would think it would.
Absolutely. Let us know in the comment section below. What do you think? Do you think a technical penalty such as ballast would make sense, or do you think we should just stick with the grid penalties? I said comment below. Reply to our Twitter posting. We're on there as well, and obviously like and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Moving on to the next talking point, and it was the lap 1, turn 1 collision between Gasly and Alonso. Pierre Gasly picking up a 5-second time penalty. Tyson, I'll come to you first. We've looked at the video footage and we've also read the note from the stewards. It did seem quite harsh at the time, but I think the video footage, looking at the gap between Perez and Gasly, it gave the stewards a decision to make, I guess.
Yeah, I think I've changed my view on this one looking back on it at hindsight. I did think at the time it was very harsh that, it was just a lap 1 incident, but looking back on it, there is plenty of, not plenty of space, but there is a little bit of space where Gasly could have got to avoid the contact. And I think some of the penalty may have come to the fact that he just dropped Alonso so far down the order and completely wrecked his race.
Yeah, I guess it was unfortunate, but Hodders, I guess they did have to take into account the fact lap 1, turn 1, and also it was wet, it was downhill, and I think Gasly did have a bit of understeer as well.
He did have some understeer, and looking on reflection, having seen more camera angles, it does appear that there was more room to move to the side without causing any adverse effects for the likes of Perez to his left. On reflection, it does seem unduly harsh, but it does also seem reasonable at the same time. Although I will say at the same time, it does seem like when Alonso played with Schumacher, he should have had a more severe penalty than 5 seconds, being more of an offence than Gasly's one, which unfortunately didn't happen.
Yeah, Alonso obviously getting 5 seconds for tapping Schumacher into a spin. Tyson, we must give the stewards collective credit across the courses in because they do have this very firm belief: turn 1, let them race unless it's a pretty clear-cut one.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what we want to see. We want to see the drivers actually getting to race without having to tiptoe around all the penalties that they may throw at them. But yes, the rules are the rules, and you just have to, enforce them as best as they possibly can. And I think the stewards, I think they got it right this time.
Okay, well, fair enough. And two small talking points, but we will obviously give them mention. Hodders, all 20 cars finish in wet conditions.
Yeah, it was an unusual one that we had wet conditions, every car finished, and no safety cars either, despite the occasional yellow flag for cars going off and spinning off and the occasional contact. No safety cars either, which is even more remarkable.
Yeah, well, I think probably Bernd Marland is probably making up for, he did quite a lot of laps in Spa, but less said about that, the better. Also, lastly, from all of us here at Double Wave Yellows, get well soon to the medical car crew of Alan van der Merwe and Dr. Ian Roberts as they tested positive before the Turkish Grand Prix. Get well soon, guys, and we hope to see you back in action at the US Grand Prix, but hopefully not too much action. So, moving on to the Drivers' Championship with 6 rounds to go. Verstappen increases his lead at the top of the championship to 262.5 points from Lewis Hamilton on 256.5 points, so a 6-point gap there. Valtteri Bottas, a huge haul of points, giving him 177 points. Lando Norris on 145, and Sergio Perez with his podium finish puts him P5 on 135 points. Honourable mentions go to the 2 Ferrari drivers, Carlos Sainz leading his teammate Charles Leclerc by half a point, 116.5 plays, 116. In the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes edge away from Red Bull. Mercedes on 433.5 points. Red Bull on 397.5 points, so a 36-point gap there. McLaren on 240 points. Ferrari closing the gap, 232.5 points. Alpine on 104. AlphaTauri just closing the gap ever so slightly to 92 points. Aston Martin dropping away from that midfield battle on 61. Williams on 23. Alfa Romeo on 7. And Haas, again, still yet to score. And one last talking point that has come up during the course of the weekend. It's been announced by Formula One that we will have more of the sprint qualifying for next season. We'll have it for 1/3 of the races, so about 7 races. We don't know which ones yet. Obviously, as soon as we know, we will let you know. So, coming up soon on the 24th of October, we have the United States Grand Prix from the Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas. Really looking forward to that one. It will be a bit of a later Grand Prix than usual for those in the UK and Europe, so make sure you check your local TV guides as to when that will be on. As for us, we will be releasing the US Grand Prix podcast on the 29th of October, so listen out for that one. We'll have it out as quickly as we can. So, final thoughts from us. Hodders, it was an interesting Turkish Grand Prix, and I say that because we had a lot of battles here, there, and everywhere, but it's rare that we get a rain-affected Grand Prix, and not really that much happen.
I mean, in times of yore, we'd almost certainly expect the likes of safety cars not having all cars finishing, but no, we had one of those occasions where it was one of those dull Grand Prix, if you'll pardon the pun in terms of the weather, that was just that.
Mm-hmm. But Tyson, with that, we have to give credit to the drivers because they all drove sensibly to the conditions, and they all, apart from the odd bits here and there, they kept it on the track.
Yeah, they all drove well, and I personally thought it was a really interesting race from a strategic standpoint. Who's going to pull the trigger first and change the tyres? Were any of them going to go all the way to the end?
And equally, were any of them going to try the slicks? And of course, we saw what happened. We got a very clear, definitive answer on that one from
Yep.
Sebastian Vettel. Tyson, it's the championship is really starting to crescendo as we hoped it would when we did the preview a good 6-7 months ago now. 6 races to go and 6 points in it. I have a feeling this will come down to the final race.
Yeah, I'm thinking exactly the same. It's just so close between Hamilton and Verstappen. There's really no calling it between them at this point.
Mm-hmm. But in terms of the Constructors' Championship, Hodders, Mercedes are really starting to pull the gap now. It's getting to the point where they could end up having a full race lead, essentially in the championship.
Absolutely. It is one of those where I think it may well go right down to the wire.
We'll wait and see. Red Bull have got to hope really that Mercedes make a critical error, and of course that is not out of the question. Right, well that is everything from us. My thanks as usual to Tyson and Hodders for their thoughts and their company. My thanks also to you for listening in and for watching. We hope you've liked the podcast. Don't forget to leave us a comment, to like and subscribe. From all of us, thanks for listening. Be good, and if you can't be good, be safe. Take care, everyone.